Hi guys, in today's video we're going to cover the foods that you actually can eat if you're doing the low FODMAP diet for IBS or SIBO. I also have a free PDF download in the doobly-doo below, so be sure to download that after you watch this video. Okay, first let's start off with the most important, the vegetables and the fruit. Now I know that the low FODMAP diet is really overwhelming and it feels like there's no vegetables that you can eat, but there actually are quite a lot of options. I listed some of my favorites in this list here, but remember the PDF below actually is a much more exhaustive list and will give you quite a few more options. But you can eat some of the vegetables like bamboo shoots, carrots, actually, most of the root vegetables for that matter. If you look, carrots, parsnips, turnips, they all make the list. Sweet potatoes, squash, with a caveat, there's some that are medium FODMAP and some that are a little bit higher, like zucchini is kind of medium FODMAP, and I didn't list it here. Butternut squash is high FODMAP, but spaghetti squash is low FODMAP. So there are some nuances, again, in the list that I'll attach here. But squashes, by and large, are either going to be lower or medium FODMAP, with the exception of butternut squash. Pumpkin, green beans, and then all of the green leafy vegetables. So I listed collards, but we could also list things like spinach and chard and kale and any of the other green leafy vegetables that you can think of. Even beet greens, even though the beet root in and of itself is not low FODMAP, it's actually high FODMAP. You can do beet greens if you are cooking beets for your family and you want to just chop off the greens and eat them yourself and give your family the root. That is one way that you could use that plant. You can see I listed banana, parentheses G, as the top one. This means that they need to be green or unripe bananas. If you get a banana and it's still got a green tip to it or it's a little bit firmer, not only is that going to be lower in FODMAP and safe for you to eat, but as an added bonus, that banana has more resistant starch in it, which is going to feed your good microbiota, which is a little hard to come by when you're treating IBS and SIBO and you're doing the low FODMAP thing. Now, if you get that same banana and you leave it on the counter for a couple of days and let it ripen and it starts to get brown spots or mushy or turns completely brown, now that is a high FODMAP food and you're going to want to either chuck it or give it to a family member to eat, because that has now, some of that resistant starch has changed into sugar, and that is a FODMAP. So be careful with bananas, but green bananas are perfectly safe. You could do things like cantaloupe, dragon fruit, which you can find at most Asian grocery stores and is absolutely delicious. Grapes should have a caveat next to it like oranges. Grapes are perfectly safe, all of the varieties, green, red, black, you name it, but raisins are not. So be cautious with the little nuances there, where the whole food, like a grape, is perfectly fine, but if you modify it, like in the case of raisins, it becomes a high FODMAP food. Similarly, I'm going to hop down here to oranges. You could eat a whole navel orange, and that is low FODMAP, but if you process it and concentrate the sugar into orange juice is quite high FODMAP. So whole food is okay, modified version of the whole food sometimes is not. Kiwi, one of my absolute favorites, is safe for the low FODMAP diet. And then some of the tropical fruits like passion fruit and pineapple. And then finally strawberry, and actually rhubarb also is low FODMAP. So if you want to do strawberry rhubarb cobbler or pie or some sort of dessert, that is also perfectly safe for the FODMAP diet. Okay, now let's talk about protein. If you are an omnivore like I am, then there's actually quite a lot of options on the low FODMAP diet. You could do all meat, seafood, and eggs, and that covers a lot of different protein sources. The trick comes down to when we start talking about the vegan protein sources, but there are some caveats that I could share with you. So for example, the 3 known high FODMAP nuts are going to be almonds, cashews, and pistachios, and those will make it the majority of the FODMAP lists. But when we get down to beans, you might think, okay, I'm hosed. If I'm a vegetarian or a vegan, beans, lentils, and tofu make up a majority of the protein that I eat. Well, A, you have the rest of the nuts and seeds, which are still safe, but B, with beans, lima beans seem to be the lowest in their FODMAP content. So if you're going to try to eat beans, maybe a small portion of lima beans would be okay for you. Remember, the FODMAP reaction is dose dependent. So a couple of bites is unlikely to trigger a symptom versus a whole serving or a whole plate of something is very much going to trigger a symptom if you're FODMAP sensitive. So with beans, there's that caveat, but you could try lima beans. And in moderation, those might be okay. Similarly, we think of lentils as high FODMAP, but the brown lentils seem to be a little bit lower in FODMAP content. Or I know like the Monash app lists canned lentils specifically as being low FODMAP. So there might be some wiggle room with the lentil conversation. And then similarly, tofu and soy products are kind of an enigma to me, but some products made out of soy are going to be safe and some are not. Tempeh, the firmer types of tofu, and edamame beans are actually low FODMAP and perfectly safe, versus silken tofu specifically is high FODMAP and should probably be avoided if you're doing the low FODMAP diet. But you can see there's actually quite a lot of protein sources you can get even if you are a vegetarian or a vegan and you're doing the low FODMAP diet. And now for the grains. Basically, it's going to be the majority of the gluten-free grains that are free reign if you're on the low FODMAP diet. So you can see some of the gluten-free favorites. We've got buckwheat, millet, oats. I'm going to tell you the caveat to that in a moment. Quinoa, rice, sorghum, and teff. The only one that doesn't make the list, to my recollection, is amaranth. And that is going to make the high FODMAP list. It's high in fructans like wheat, barley, and rye. But other than amaranth, pretty much all of the gluten-free grains are going to be fair game. Now, there are some little caveats to know, though. Oats and oatmeal are a little bit tricky because, again, the whole less processed food is going to be safe. So, for example, steel-cut oats or overnight oats should be fine, but oat milk is high FODMAP. Similarly, if you get the instant oats or the really processed, ground up oats, that is high FODMAP, but the steel cut or the rolled oats, the less processed they are, the lower the FODMAP content. So that's the caveat with oats, but you should be able to tolerate steel cut or rolled oats just fine. There is a similar story to be told for sorghum. Sorghum itself, if you get it as a flour or as a whole grain, is fine, and that is low FODMAP. But sorghum syrup does not make this low FODMAP list because sorghum syrup is high FODMAP. So there's little caveats. You can't take each item on here totally for granted, but that's why I gave you guys the PDF below, because that gave me the opportunity to write a lot more than I could fit on this board. Finally, let's talk about the sweets that you can have when you're doing low FODMAP. A quick caveat to this section, though, is that when we typically talk about monosaccharides, we're thinking of fructose. But it is possible for other monosaccharides, other simple sugars, to trigger your SIBO symptoms or feed the SIBO. So all of these should be in moderation. And one easy way to think of this is that there's no fructose in a glucose-based breath test for SIBO, but the glucose can sure as heck feed SIBO, produce gases, and give us a positive breath test result. So even pure glucose has the potential to trigger symptoms and be a FODMAP contributor if you're on the low FODMAP diet. So keep that in mind. But that being said, I do think that there's a good therapeutic value to having treats and having some sanity in your life and some normalcy in your diet. So these are the safer of the sweeteners that you could choose. Brown rice syrup, coconut sugar, monk fruit, which has a caveat, stevia, which has a caveat, and maple syrup. Now the two caveats that I just mentioned. For monk fruit, this is a totally zero FODMAP sweetener. It's very tasty, it's very well tolerated, but make sure you get the right one. There's a monk fruit sweetener on the market that is monk fruit combined with erythritol. And erythritol is a polyol, which is the P in FODMAP. So it's quite high FODMAP. So as you're looking, the brand, I don't know off the top of my head, but the type that you see in Costco or sometimes on Amazon or possibly other stores like Whole Paycheck, that is going to be a high FODMAP version. So just check the label and make sure that you're getting actual pure monk fruit powder as opposed to monk fruit with a lot of erythritol. Now for stevia, the caveat to that is that stevia is a non-caloric sweetener. There's absolutely no calories to it, which is lovely. But that doesn't mean that you can use it 24/7 and not have consequences. And this goes for everybody. For stevia, my biggest beef with it right now is not, from a blood sugar perspective or a nutritional perspective, but just be a little bit cautious with IBS and SIBO because stevia, even though it's non-caloric and doesn't feed SIBO, it has been shown to inhibit the migrating motor complex, which will disrupt your motility. And that is not a good thing if you have IBS or SIBO. So what I would say with all of these, including stevia, is if you're going to use these sweeteners, you want it to be a part of a meal that does contain calories or something that you're going to be chewing and enjoying as a whole food. So if you're making a dessert with stevia, I think that's fine. But if you're putting like a little bit of stevia in your tea or soda or seltzer water and sipping it throughout the day, you do run the risk of inhibiting your MMC and making the SIBO or IBS worse. So just be mindful of that. Non-caloric does not mean it comes without consequences. So even the non-caloric sweeteners should really just be used around mealtime. And last but not least, I didn't write it here, but there are some low lactose dairy products that you might be able to tolerate. For example, butter or ghee, or even things like sour cream might be tolerable if you're doing the low FODMAP diet. But keep in mind that you might be in the category like me, where I don't react to the lactose in milk, I react to the protein. So if you have any known autoimmunity, or if you have mystery symptoms still, despite doing low FODMAP, you might consider eliminating even the low lactose dairy products and just opting for vegan replacements for those dairy products or going completely casein free and see if that makes a difference. All right, now executive summary time. So you can see there's actually quite a lot of foods that you could eat on the low FODMAP diet, but the thing about it is, and this should not be a surprise to anybody on my channel, is that the goal is to get off of this restricted diet ASAP. I hate to see people get stuck on the low FODMAP diet for months and years at a time because it just doesn't need to happen, you guys. So yes, there's a lot of foods that you have for options while you're doing the restricted phase of low FODMAP, and we're going to talk about reintroducing FODMAPs in other videos, but just know that the goal should be to reintroduce almost all of these foods, maybe minus gluten and dairy, into your diet, depending on what the root causes are for your IBS or SIBO. But that's the really important thing, is getting to the root cause of your IBS or the root cause of your SIBO, understanding that, treating that, and then you will see that your tolerance for FODMAPs magically increases and you're able to add in foods that you never thought you'd be able to eat again. And on that note, I am so excited to introduce, I am launching my first online course. It's called FODMAP Freedom in 90 Days. And the nutritional focus, obviously, will be reintroducing the FODMAPs safely and without consequence. The real meat and potatoes of the course, though, is it's going to be a DIY, treat your own IBS, SIBO, or dysmotility. They all kind of fall under a big umbrella, in my opinion. But we're going to talk about everything that could be related to SIBO or IBS or both. And we're going to talk about how you could treat that at home with foods and herbs, and how you could get out of this sucky low FODMAP diet once and for all, and eat the onions, and eat the garlic, and eat the avocados, and live your dang life. If you would like information, there's a link in the doobly-doo below. It's not officially open yet, but I am taking emails so that I can alert you when the course does launch. I so look forward to seeing you there, and I hope that you get to eat all the FODMAPs really soon. One last thing, please subscribe to my channel. It actually really helps me do more videos and set more time aside for YouTube. So if you could support this channel and support me in my efforts at educating the world about IBS, SIBO, and FODMAPs, go ahead and click the bell, click the like, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.